I tell people that I make the most expensive photographic prints in the world, and to my knowledge, I think I do. They're very expensive by the time you get big with them. So we're using platinum and palladium, which are noble metals. They're both currently trading around $1,000 an ounce as of us recording this. The last time I checked palladium, it had just dropped below $1,000 an ounce for the first time in years.
Well, hey everyone! Welcome to episode 375 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I'm excited to bring you a conversation that I had with the owner of Hidden Light, Matt Beaty. Print enthusiasts are going to absolutely love our conversation. Hidden Light is a one-stop shop for photography nerds like us, located in Flagstaff, Arizona. They are most well known for their platinum palladium prints, which is something that we discuss at length today on the show. We cover a lot of ground, so be sure to listen all the way to the end. If you appreciate the varied yet in-depth conversations that we bring you every single week on the show, please do consider supporting me financially. We are ad-free, which means that I depend on you to cover my expenses and to make the podcast worth my time to continue to create. There's lots of ways to support the podcast, ranging from PayPal one-time or recurring payments, or the most popular way, which is through Patreon. To learn all about the various ways that you can support the show, please visit mattpaynephotography.com and click on the podcast link in the menu. You can also learn about our exclusive executive producer program, which grants long-term supporters the ability to showcase their favorite episodes. Thanks in advance for all of your support. All right, let's get to today's episode with Matt Beaty. All right, Matt Beaty, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I love the t-shirt, blood, sweat, and platinum.
Blood, sweat, and platinum. Yeah, we were working with Tyler Shields one day, and I was really hurting for it. I was screwing up a lot of prints, and we talked about blood, sweat, and tears. But I was like, no, blood, sweat, and platinum.
I love it. Love it. Well, so you come recommended a couple of times. I think most memorably for me was Michael Strickland, I believe, recommended you, and I think David Brookover recommended you as well. So it's been a couple times now.
You gotta hope.
Yeah. So here we are, and you're not that far away from me. You're in Flagstaff.
Yeah, up by the Grand Canyon, poverty with a view, baby. Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful place to be. Absolutely astonishing, but holy cow, it's expensive to be here.
Yeah, it's funny, man. I was doing research for this episode, and I went to your guys' website, and I saw that you were hiring. I actually know somebody who would love that job, and I sent it to them, and they were like, I can't live in Flagstaff for that money.
No, it's not a living wage. This is the kind of town where you definitely work two jobs.
Yeah. Well, Matt, so for people who aren't familiar with you, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Matt Beaty. I own a print lab called Hidden Light. We specialize in darkroom processes, so black and white specifically, silver gelatin, and my favorite, platinum palladium. So we started the platinum palladium gig many years ago after Ilford killed the Cibachrome process, which, for those who may be familiar, was the holy grail of color photographic processes. And it was something that we specialized in for a long time. And then when Ilford unceremoniously murdered that process, we were like, well, now what? So we picked up platinum palladium printing. I started working here in 2013, so it's been 10 years, a little over 10 years since I started. And I picked up printing platinum after starting as a picture framer here. And been going at it strong ever since.
That's what I was thinking, because the person I sent this to is really into black and white photography, and they're unemployed. And I was like, okay, look, I know it's not a living wage, but it's a foot in the door, and you never know where it could take you, right? And you started out as the framer, So I'm just saying to that person who's probably listening, you never know.
Yeah, it's. I started as the picture framing person, having never done any picture framing before, having just spent all of my spare time in the darkroom at school and at home, and it's like, okay, well, this is picture adjacent. It's better than working my corporate job, so yeah, I'll learn picture framing, and then that naturally segued in. It worked really well. We'll have hired somebody a week from today. Like we're going fast. So if you're out there and you need a picture framing job for less than a living wage, hit me up.
No, it's just funny though because in a lot of the conversations I've had over the years with photographers that have kind of found their calling, so to speak, and found a way to carve out a little niche for themselves, it seems to me like it always kind of started out with like getting their foot in the door with something that was adjacent, like you're saying, and then it builds from there. So I feel like if you're kind of wandering around lost and not sure about this photography thing, those kinds of opportunities are pretty interesting to take up.
Yeah, it seems like everyone wants to be the guy or the gal pressing the button. We all want to be the photographer. But the industry of photography is so much bigger than just that one person. You have all the techs and assistants and producers and printers and everything else that surrounds that person who presses the button. And I found it to be more fun being the guy who teaches the workshop or makes the prints or whatever than necessarily being the guy shooting the thing, because it takes some of the pressure off, and it means that when I'm shooting I can enjoy it because it's not my full-time gig, and I can make prints for other people, and that is the thing where I can get really down and nitty-gritty and attention to detail. But when I'm out shooting, I can just go have fun.
Right. So you started out as a picture framer. I would love to hear a little bit more specifically about kind of what all is entailed in what you guys do at Hidden Light.
Yeah, it's sort of a one-stop shop for photo nerds. We do picture or camera sales. So we buy and sell used cameras because we're all photographers and it's a hobby. Like we all want to play with the new toys and buy and sell stuff. So we just do that. And then we develop film, black and white, E6 and C41, all in house. We scan it, send it. We do printmaking, color, silver, platinum, pisography, and then occasionally really weird alt process stuff. Like we figured out a way to make ambrotypes from digital files, so we can shift into the sort of strange out there processes. And then we do picture framing, and then we have a gallery. So start to finish, I can take you through the whole process from never having touched a camera to having all your work hung up beautifully framed on the walls of the gallery.
Well, cool. So my follow-up question to all that is how did you even get into this niche line of business? I know you started as the picture framer, but I'm guessing that you had first had an interest in capturing images and you were interested in kind of learning more about what goes on behind the scenes. So tell us a little bit about kind of that entry point for you.
Big time. I, like many, I think, started in school. So I came up during that sort of weird time where digital and film were performing in a similar way. So in high school, I was shooting sometimes with digital and sometimes with film. And occasionally I would use one over the other for availability or for whatever it is. And I was confident that I was going to be a National Geographic photographer. I was going to work for Time, for Nat Geo, for Life. You know, you go flipping through the magazines and you're looking at really the cream of the crop of the entire industry and thinking, yeah, I could do that. When it's like, no, I really can't. But that was the way in. And so I pursued photojournalism, editorial work, and sports during college. And so I was, during my spare time, I was in the college darkroom every spare minute of every day playing with my fine art pictures. And then I shot my way through school by working for the university. I managed to get this really cool gig where I went to every university game of every university sport and photographed every player. And in doing so, they paid my tuition. So it was like, okay, sweet, I'm a photographer now. And eventually that got real old because there was no challenge in it anymore. I was sort of the monkey pressing the button. When you shoot sports full time and it's like, here's the shot list, don't deviate, don't get artistic. You're not allowed to put cameras in fun places or use strobes. Like, this is what we want from you. You just end up being the guy pressing the button. And it got old. So when I had the opportunity to start in picture framing and I got to see platinum palladium for the first time being, a hand coded process where in order to make a print, I have to take a piece of watercolor paper basically and coat it with this emulsion that's hilariously expensive and expose it to UV light and make the process. And I watched the first one develop and my mind just sort of exploded a little bit because the silver gelatin darkroom, it takes a while, 3 to 5 minutes for that image to develop and come up in the developer, and it's a dark room. But platinum palladium develops almost instantly, and the big ones are really cool to develop, and my mind just sort of blew. I was standing there like, I want to do this. How do I learn this?
Nice.
And
nice.
my mentor and boss, Corey Allen, was like, yeah, you can do one if you want. And so I did a couple. And I ended up, some of the first images I ever printed actually were David Brookover's, who's one of our clients. And I printed it backwards because I didn't know which way up to put the negative on the platinum because it seemed like it should go one way and it didn't go that way. So I'm throwing away all this money. Basically, Corey's like, yep, nope, screwed that up. Go to a different one. Try it again. It's like, oh man, that was really expensive. I'm sorry. So that's the only way you learn it, is screwing them up. I'm really good at that.
That's that encapsulates photography in general, right? I mean, spending thousands of dollars on a trip and you mess up because you don't take your lens cap off, or maybe your shutter speed's not correct or whatever.
You're shooting a small JPEG the whole trip.
Right, like that's how we learn in photography, right? Is we make big mistakes.
Yep, exactly. And to some extent, printing, like photography, is a numbers game. I've come to realize that you can be as an intentional and whatever photographer as you want, spend all the time and have all the nice gear, but if you only go shooting twice a year, you got no chance. If you're out with your camera every day or every week shooting, your work's going to get better just by sheer volume of paying attention to the stuff. So
Matt, your business is all about helping photographers rekindle or find their love for the process of handmade artwork. What is it about a handmade product that you think enhances the process of photography?
I would start with just the process of printing, period. Because so many of us go through this entirely digital process of shoot the thing, edit the thing, Instagram the thing, full stop. And the process of printing, even if it's iPhone photos, it gives you something tangible to hold in your hands, which makes the photograph somehow more meaningful. And so my first step for people is always just print. Doesn't matter how cheap you do it. It doesn't matter where you do it. Like, get a print you can hold in your hand. And you do that long enough, and eventually you'll want to escalate the quality of what that is. And especially for the black and white people, you can kind of get into this handmade. I mean, okay, yes, there are the colors, the carbons and the transfers, and that is so painful I can't even wrap my head around it. But the silver gelatin and the platinum palladium processes, while they are handmade, are really not that technically difficult to do. You can do them at home at 8x10 or 11x14, like a reasonable, normal people size, and really not hate your life too much. And so, yeah, I like it to be like something that people can actually get into and try on their own and whatever. And listen, 80% of the time people come to do a printing workshop with me and then they realize that it's more painful than they want it to be. And then I end up making their prints anyway, which is awesome. But they still get to come and experience the process of like, okay, so here's what this does and here's where this goes. And I hand them the brush and say, coat this piece of paper because this coating is your signature. This print is one of one. No two ever prints will ever be the same because you coated this one this way. And then the next time you didn't have quite as much caffeine in your system and it made a little bit more sense and it looks a little bit cleaner or whatever.
Right.
So the handmade aspect of it is sort of maybe not the ending point, but a point really far along the path for most photographers where it becomes like, okay, I can't achieve this look any other way. And I really like this look.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. So many of us are obsessed with reproduction in terms of the print looking exactly the same every single time it's done. And I think there's a case to be made for the opposite. Like that print's going to look a little different than that print, and that one's going to look a bit different from that one because you spent a little bit more time on the brushing, or you exposed it for a little bit longer, or whatever the case may be, or maybe use different chemicals, whatever. So I think that handmade aspect of it helps to provide kind of another layer of uniqueness to the artwork.
Totally. And even to the extent that I can make 10 copies of the same print in the same day at the same time with the same chemistry, like everything is the same, and two of them will look drastically different for whatever reason. That sheet of
Yeah.
paper didn't coat the same, or who knows what it is. So I do run editions for people and say, okay, I want 10 each of 5 images. And we do those. And I'm actually going to make 12 or 15 each of 5 images so that I can pare them down and be like, okay, these are the similar ones and these are the weird outliers for whatever reason I don't understand.
Right. Yeah. And I
Atmospheric
feel,
conditions play a huge role too. So
oh,
temperature and humidity in the building, if my building heats up 15 degrees over the course of the day, my prints will look different from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. In a massive way.
well, that must be awesome living in Flagstaff.
Yeah, I mean, we get 60-degree swings during the day of temperature, and the humidity here is atrocious. So I have to so the room I'm in right now is my platinum palladium print room, and I keep humidifiers in here, and the floor is actually heated. That's how we heat the building. It's a concrete floor that's heated, and so when I really need humidity, I'll take a gallon of water and just dump it on the floor, and that will help
Nice.
it evaporate, and I can get this room up to 50% humidity pretty quick.
Right. Yeah. Well, I want to mention one more thing about kind of getting into printing because I think there's this perception that printing has to be expensive, and it, it's not really true. I mean, I just have a Canon Pro 10. It's nothing special, but I can do like 12 by 18s, which isn't bad. And I got that printer on eBay for like 150 bucks. I feel like I spend maybe $100 every few months on ink, and then
Well, see,
another 100 or
that's the
$200 on
trick.
paper, right? I mean, it's not.
Yeah, that's the trick is that we as photographers have lost sight of the fact that photography costs money because we all shoot digital now. If you shoot film and you say you're shooting 35 millimeter and you know it costs you $1 every time you press the shutter, that's normal. That's part of your experience. Taking pictures costs money, but we've lost sight of that. And so if you think, oh, it costs, say you spend in a big year buying a new printer, buying ink, buying paper, you spend $300, $500. That's the end of the world because photography is supposed to be free, and it's free when I take it from my camera to my computer to Instagram. But then you can't hold it in your hands. So once you adjust your expectation that like making prints costs money, taking pictures costs money, going to really cool places as part of all of that costs money, taking workshops like, oh, it's a hobby and it costs money. And if I'm lucky, maybe someday down the road, I'll get into the galleries or make a book or whatever, and I can make some of that money back. But it costs money to do all of this stuff. And then it's like, oh, yeah, sure. I'll spend $300 on a printer and some paper and some ink. That's great.
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, totally. I mean, you think about other hobbies, and like, let's keep it at a hobby level for a second. Because I do think there's a tendency for people to want to, for whatever reason, photography as a hobby, I feel like most people feel like they have to make the money back for some reason. And I think that's dangerous thinking because it can send you down some really weird roads. But let's take it down the hobby road for a second. I mean, think about other people's hobbies where, like, learning to play music, right? Most people, you're going to spend a few hundred, maybe even thousand, $2,000 on instruments, maybe an amplifier. Maybe you're going to spend, gosh, I don't even know, like $300 a month on lessons, I mean, probably more. And then you're going to have to spend all this time going to do playing for open mics and stuff like that and getting humiliated. And most of those people aren't be like, well, someday I'm gonna make tons of money playing music. Like most of them just want to get really good at playing music, and that's good enough. But they understand that there's an invested cost involved in that process.
Right. Yeah. So the person that I most wanted to hear on your podcast, actually, you recently have you had on, David Duchemin talks a lot about the idea of the amateur and us doing photography for the love of the creative process and not necessarily to get rich. Like, you want a great way to make a fortune in photography? Start with a really big fortune and get into photography,
I was,
because
I
by
was gonna
the end of
say,
it, you'll have a small fortune left.
yeah, I was gonna say if you want to make money in photography, just sell your camera.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's important to me that I approach my own photography from the standpoint of, listen, I just want to enjoy the experience. I want to
Right.
make something that is meaningful to me and makes me feel something. And if that connects with other people, cool. And if they want to buy some of my prints, awesome. But really, I just want cool prints on my walls for me. And if you start at that point, maybe someday you do get to the point where somebody rich and famous walks into your house for a party or sees your work on a gallery or the internet somewhere and says, "Oh yeah, I need an edition of these. Here's $1 million." But if you
Yeah.
start from the place where you are approaching the thing and saying, "I need to make $1 million at this," like, pff, good luck. That's rough.
Yeah, and I mean, you're probably not going to enjoy it. The motivation is going to get really sideways. Depending on your ethics and your values, you can end up doing some really questionable things. Yeah, I would encourage people to do it for the love of it first.
Absolutely. And if you end up in a place where you love photography so much that you want to see your work printed and hold it in your hands and put it on the wall and live with it and give it to your friends, and do that. That should be part of the goal. I love that.
Yeah. Well, let's dive deep into the platinum palladium thing for people who aren't familiar with it. What is the difference between platinum palladium and silver gelatin printing?
So the dark room that we all grew up in, or some of us grew up in, and enjoyed in high school, and for some of us college, you got that smell of fixer. Like when you think of dark room, you see a red light in your head, and you can smell that ammonia. That's the silver gelatin dark room, and the platinum palladium dark room is very different from that. So the platinum palladium process is older by quite a bit, and basically what we do is, instead of buying pre-coated paper from Ilford, which is where you buy the paper anymore, that has to be kept in the dark, whatever, I can just take any sheet of watercolor paper that holds up to chemistry. And that is to say, that is really good at being wet for a long period of time. And I coat it with a mixture of ferric oxalate, platinum, and palladium. And so I'm taking a brush or a glass rod, I use a brush, and brush on this emulsion to this piece of paper. And I can do it in regular light. As long as the lights in my building or my room or whatever don't put out a bunch of UV light, because this process is only sensitive to UV, I'm good to go. So I don't have to spend all day in the dark. I do by choice because I'm a darkroom denizen, but the whole process, like, you could just do in a normal room and it's no big deal. And so each piece of paper that you coat becomes sensitive to UV light, and you stick a negative on it. It's a contact print process, which is something we've also sort of gotten away from. What that means is that my negative must be the same size as my finished print. So if I want to make an 8 by 10 print, I have to have an 8 by 10 negative. If I want to make a 40 by 60 inch print, I have to have a 40 by 60 inch negative. Some cool cats these days still shoot large format and ultra large format film, and thank you, people, keep it alive, I'm into it. We can take their black and white negatives and just make prints straight from their film, but most of us shoot digital now, and so I have to use an inkjet printer to print a new full-size negative. And I basically make that a sandwich with the piece of paper that I've just coated and expose it to a whole lot of UV light. Think tanning bed. Think like outdoors in the sun for a long time, UV light. Like, if it's enough to get your sunglasses to transition, or your glasses to transition from one way to the other, or if you're like thinking, maybe I'm going to get a sunburn, that's the amount of UV light we're talking about. It's sort of obscene. And so that creates a chemical reaction with the platinum palladium salts and the ferric oxalate. You develop it, and now you have an extremely stable black and white print. By the time you're finished with the clearing baths and the chemical side of the development stuff, you have a print that we expect to last thousands of years rather than merely hundreds for silver gelatin.
Right.
Which is like, we're going to be long dead for either process. So who really cares? At that point, I recommend choosing the process based on its aesthetic value necessarily than the longevity. And the processes do look quite different. So your standard black and white that you grew up as silver gelatin in your darkroom at home or in your bathroom or at school is pretty high contrast, or at least can be pretty high contrast. The blacks specifically in silver gelatin paper can be very deep. And by deep, I mean black. You got blacker blacks. The platinum palladium process struggles with that. It's not something we get so much because it's a matte finish paper. And so for those of you who've done any printing, you know that a matte finish paper is necessarily less black than a gloss finish paper, say, and then satin and luster sort of sit somewhere in between. And so that's really been the big limitation is if you want like a punchy, high contrast, Ansel Adams style print, you're sticking with silver gelatin. And then platinum palladium is the like softer, warmer, more ethereal, more mellow sort of print. And I've been actually working on a way to get gloss platinums, which I am finally getting close on, which is very exciting. But until then, or until now, basically, it's been essentially impossible to get a glossy platinum with a deep black. I can go into why it's more along archival, whatever, but at some point you get so nerdy that your viewers will fall asleep while they're driving.
Well, maybe let's talk a little bit about kind of what the end product actually looks like. Because I remember when I was talking with David Brookover, and we'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. And maybe I'm completely wrong, and you're the expert, so you tell me. But I feel like it wasn't necessarily black and white. It was more of like a sepia style print. I mean, tell me kind of what the end product looks like.
Yeah, so Mr. Brookover likes his platinums quite warm. And so for all of his prints, I actually don't use platinum in his platinum palladiums. They're pure palladium prints.
Oh.
The more palladium we use in that ratio of platinum palladium, the warmer the print will be. And then I can also add warmth to the process by heating the developer. And so David Michael Kennedy is famous for this. He's another platinum printmaker, and he will straight up boil the developer, which does two things. The first is that it makes that chemical reaction happen extremely fast, and so the print develops instantly. And then the second thing that it does is add a lot of warmth to the whole image across all tonal values. Brookover does something similar. I typically develop his platinums or his palladiums at about 140 degrees, so they're very warm. But you can, instead of heating that developer, just run it at room temperature and get something that's much closer to a neutral black and white print. It's still warm. It's still got a little chocolate. It's not quite to Van Dyke, and it's certainly not quite to sepia. It's kind of like if you were making a silver gelatin print and you sort of glanced at the sepia toner and then finished out the process rather than setting your print in sepia for a long period of time, for those of us who hang out in the silver darkroom. So it's warmer and lower contrast than silver, but not necessarily quite as far as sepia. We can push it pretty far and get that look, but I typically don't.
And is there any way in platinum palladium process to go the other direction, to like cool it down in terms of, instead of it being a warmer print, being more of a cool tone or kind of silvery?
You can
finish?
achieve near neutral.
Gotcha.
Depending on how you do it. I would say that the most neutral prints in this process are pure platinum prints. So rather than pure palladium, like Brookover likes, you go to pure platinum. The difficulty there is you don't get the smooth tonal shifts necessarily. Pure platinum tends to be a little more blocky. And so your areas of dark tones tend to just block up with no detail and no shift between, say, zone 0, zone 1, zone 2. It's just black. And then
0 to 5.
Right, yeah, exactly. And then by the time you get into the midtones, it sort of behaves and it's okay. they're more difficult to make, they're more difficult to develop, and they tend to block up real bad. So I sort of steer people away from that whenever possible because it doesn't look quite the way you want it to. It almost gets bromoil-y,
Hmm.
like not quite that far, but like halfway to a block print in some cases. It's harder to retain that detail. But
Mm-hmm.
that would be the way to get closer to neutral.
And then I'm guessing, these are somewhat rare elements, rare earth minerals. Talk a little bit about sourcing of the material and cost associated, and maybe what's involved in preparing it for print.
This stuff is so expensive. These are, I tell people that I make the most expensive photographic prints in the world. And to my knowledge, I think I do. They're very expensive by the time you get big with them. So we're using platinum and palladium, which are noble metals. Good call. They're both currently trading around $1,000 an ounce as of us recording this. The last time I checked palladium, it had just dropped below $1,000 an ounce for the first time in years. During COVID, it was over 3,000 an ounce. There are only a couple of palladium mines in the world. One of the largest is controlled by the Russians. And I think that the reason the price has dropped so far is that Russia's dumping its stock. I buy pre-made chemistry rather than mixing it myself from Bostic and Sullivan. Shameless plug, I am not an owner and I pay full price. They make really good chemistry. It's consistent, it does what it's supposed to do. I buy everything from them so that I don't have to spend time with the beakers and the boilers and the Mad Hatter sort of scientist experience. That's not where I thrive. They do all the chemistry for me. I buy it, I mix it, and I put it on the piece of paper. But when people say, oh, how much is a platinum print? Like, yeah, it's really expensive. The raw materials alone are like thousands of dollars at a time for me to buy the chemistry. So don't expect to get a platinum print for $20. It's not going to happen.
That makes sense. Well, maybe that's a good segue. Given the cost associated with these types of prints, why should digital and film photographers alike consider printing on platinum palladium? What's the appeal to it?
There's two big appeal, 2.5 big appeals. The first one that I tell people is that these prints will last forever. Now, we'll all be long dead, so it doesn't really matter whether they last forever. But if that's something that you like in terms of leaving a legacy or having your images around for a very long time, check. The other and the more important part is aesthetic. You have to like the way they look. If you have seen, I don't know, any of the like really old photographs from the good old days, you've probably seen a platinum palladium print. It has a very specific look to it, and you have to like the way that it looks. That's the most important bit. We can replicate that style to some extent with other processes that cost far less. And so people who are trying to dip their toes into, will my image look good in platinum? I have a couple of recommendations for them to do that without spending a fortune. And then the final one is collectability. Some galleries and therefore some collectors like to have this image that's super archival, that will last forever and only looks a specific way that's somewhat difficult to duplicate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to do a limited edition of a series of images that you have that are black and white and low contrast already, and you want to charge $10,000 a piece for them, print them in platinum and print them big, and there's a chance that somebody will say, oh, I collect this sort of photography. This is a cool process. The downside of that is nobody knows what it is. So you're always having to educate your consumer about what platinum palladium prints are and why they're so expensive and why these people should be willing to pay more for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's less of an issue if it's like the customer comes in and says, ooh, that's pretty. It's going to look good sitting above my couch. Then It's like, boop, sold. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are two very different customers.
They really are, and they're really rare. Like, to find a collector who knows what platinum palladium prints are, knows about the heritage, and doesn't have to be told all these things during a 30-minute conversation is really rare. Even photographers who sell mostly platinum palladium prints spend most of their time having that conversation with people. So if it's like, okay, yeah, these are expensive, you have to really want it because you like the way it looks.
Well, I mean, there's people that own like 30, 40 sports cars, so I'm sure those same kind of people would be into
Those are
buying.
my people.
You know what I'm saying, though, right?
I do, totally.
Yeah. It's just you gotta figure out who those people are and market to them.
Yeah, there are people who just want the best, the biggest. One of the things we do is we make some of the biggest platinum prints in the world. And so the photographers that I work for who are taking these prints and selling them, half the reason is for the collector to be able to say, I own one of the biggest platinum prints in the world and no one else can have it, only me, neener, neener, neener. And I
What
respect that. Like, great.
what's the biggest you've done?
It's 40 by 90 inches.
Wow, that's a
So
lot of
damn
platinum.
near 4 by 8 feet. We're just shy of that size.
Yeah. I mean, I've printed that big before, but not on platinum.
No, it's very expensive.
Oh, it's expensive on normal processes.
Yeah, it really is. And at that size, say you did it in an inkjet, you might spend, I don't know, 800 or $1,000 on a print that size,
Oh,
maybe
more,
more.
but yeah.
And but if you take that print and touch it before it's been mounted, you've just thrown away that money because they're so fragile. It's astonishing. The great thing about platinum prints is they're not that fragile.
Hmm.
I kept one rolled up in a tube for 2 years, and I would just take it out of the tube and roll it onto a table. It was bigger than the table, but I would roll it out so people could see it before I had saved up enough money to frame the darn thing. And it's fine. It looks the same now as it did the day that I finished drying it because it's quite durable, which is great.
Interesting. That's pretty fascinating. I have a follow-up question to that question that kind of struck me as we were talking about it and talking about rare earth minerals. And primarily our audience here is nature photographers, nature lovers, people who probably don't like the fact that there's platinum and palladium mines in the world, which whatever, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how do we reconcile that piece of it in terms of having an additional impact on, or a negative impact on, environmental issues?
If you look at the percentage of the materials that we're using for printmaking versus those that are being used for explosives and catalytic converters, which are the two major uses for platinum and palladium commercially around the world, it's negligible. It's I couldn't tell you how much of a percent it is, but it's so little. Palladium for a long time you could get for like $300 an ounce. It was so cheap. And then car manufacturers the world round started drastically increasing the amount of palladium they use in catalytic converters. So when you get the catalytic converter stolen off your Prius, it's because it's full of palladium. And that
Hmm.
metal is extremely valuable. So as the price of palladium increases, you can watch the catalytic converter thefts go up. So
And
yes, we're using metals that are mined in giant mines around the world, and that's probably not great. But really, what happens is when Bostic and Sullivan makes this chemistry, he'll go out and buy a coin and take that coin and shave it down and use the material that he's just shaved this coin. Like basically, it's not quite sticking it in a blender and running it, but it's the same basic principle. Just file it down into nothing. That's what he's using. So it's material that's already in the marketplace anyway. I also don't recommend that those same people consider what goes into picture framing
oh, yeah, wood.
because the wood and glues that are used in picture framing are egregious.
Yeah, it's one of those
Yikes.
things, man. You start looking at all the ways things have an impact. It's like I just don't want to know anymore. To some
Yeah,
degree,
there is sort
anyway.
of that like bury your head in the sand. Don't tell me about the horse glue and rabbit glue and everything else that gets thrown into what the way photography is made. Like gelatin emulsion comes from something. Silver
Mhm.
gelatin paper, a gelatin in the emulsions of film, like all of that. There's an impact to all of this, and there always has been.
Yeah, I think gelatin comes mostly from like horse hooves or cattle hooves, some stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, I
Which
wasn't going to say it,
parenthetically
but
is
like,
also in our
ugh.
food. It's in like vitamins, and you ever look at the back of like Jello?
Uh
It's
huh.
in all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Yogurt.
Right. Yeah. So it's not like bury your head in the sand and, oh, this isn't happening, but it's also like, is what we're doing creating a measurable impact on that? Like, I don't think so. Could be.
Yeah.
I
Right.
doubt it. There's only like half a dozen commercial platinum palladium printmakers in the world that I know of.
Wow.
So it's a pretty small industry. Like you were talking earlier about niche, it's real niche.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say I'm only familiar with two, so
Right. And you've had both of them on this podcast.
that's right. All right,
Yep.
so Matt, if someone wanted to get into making prints like this, what steps should they take to prepare their files for printing?
This is, without doubt, the most common question that I get is how big can you make my print? And will this look good in platinum? The answers to those two questions categorically are as big as you want and yes. The technology for that has been somewhat recent. So, what I ask my clients for is 16-bit RGB in a nice big color space like Adobe or ProPhoto, TIFFs, and then leave it alone. Don't upsample it, don't downsample it. Like, let me do as much of the editing as you're comfortable with, because some people do some really interesting things to photos in Photoshop or Lightroom, and you should have just left that clarity slider alone, dude. Like, quit it.
Well, yeah, I
So,
mean, it really affects prints for sure. Those kind of things, like
yeah.
sharpening too, can really have a negative impact.
Right. And so, what I'll typically ask for people, especially if we're doing reasonably large prints, I'll say, give me the file edited as a 16-bit TIFF in Adobe 1998 or ProPhoto, looking the way that you want the print to look. Like, do whatever you want to it. And then also, separately, please send me your raw files straight out of camera.
Mm.
Because if you did some really egregious, terrible things to get from point A to point C, I'd like to be able to do those things slightly differently so that the math works out in Photoshop. There was a while on the GFX 100, the first one, where if you pushed the files out of that sensor too far in terms of asking it for contrast, you started to see these hideous lines. And what you were seeing was the way that the sensor was put together. And if you're asking for too much gain in between a couple of those channels, like all of a sudden your print has this terrible crosshatch look to it.
Mm.
And so
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have
I've
to
seen that.
start from scratch from the raw file and start over and do it less crazy.
That makes sense. And then outside of platinum, palladium printing, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see photographers make as it relates to file preparation and printing?
So there are some really cool features in all the standard programs that capture ones, the Lightrooms of the world, that let you do something called soft proofing. And most people have never heard of this. And then they hear about it and they go, that sounds stupid, and they don't bother with it. Soft proofing is your friend. It will let you see what parts of your image are unprintable in any given process with any given print lab. And so if I'm going to work with one of the big major print labs, Adorama or B&H or MPix or whoever, I can usually find a way to download the profiles they're using for the specific paper that I want. And I can click a box in Lightroom or in Photoshop or in Capture One and say, show me what's going to work. And it will show you, oh, these reds and yellows, you're not going to print like this. They're going to print fuchsia and you're going to hate that. Fix it. So the soft proofing feature is hugely important. And then the other one I recommend is hard proofing, which is what nobody does because it costs money. But basically, instead of me just taking my file and saying, all right, I want a 40 by 60 metal print, I'm going to stick it on the wall behind me. And I just pay $1,200 or however much those things cost anymore. And it shows up and it looks like absolute trash. I'm like, oops, never doing that again. I guess printing's not for me. Well, that's one way to approach it. But if you had ordered an 8 by 10 of the same image in the same process on the same paper, whatever, and said, this looks like trash, maybe I should edit the file and then do that 2 or 3 times. Eventually, you'll get to an 8 by 10 that you're like, yes, this is what I wanted. And you order that 40 by 60. It costs you an extra 2 weeks of waiting time and $100 worth of extra prints. But now you know that when you get it, you'll have like, this is the file for me. But it costs money. and nobody wants to do that. And I understand it. So we, as a lab, hard proof everything. You send me your file and I soft proof it and I send it back to you and I say, this is what it's probably going to sort of look like. And you say, great, do one. And then I make an 8x10 and I say, what do you think? And then you say, looks terrible. Do this and this and this and this. And we go back and forth a couple of times. We physically take a Sharpie and mark up the print and say, add contrast, darken this, dodge this, burn this. And then we get to go make a full-size print after all of that. But it's time consuming and it's expensive and nobody wants to do that.
And you need to have a decent reason to do it. Like, to your point, if you want to have the perfect print hanging on your wall in your house, like, go through that process. It's worth it. I mean, it's not like you have a customer waiting for you, right? So just go through the process of getting it done. On the flip side, if you have a print that all of a sudden people want to buy prints of, I think soft proofing will probably get you there pretty close, depending on the printer. Especially if what I do is I'll send a variety of different prints with different colors, different contrast levels, blah, 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 blah. Get those back. And then I kind of have a pretty good idea of what different prints are going to look like. And I'm pretty comfortable with that. But some people are not comfortable with that. But my experience is that it works out pretty well if you just spend a little bit of money up front, get comfortable with that printer, and then you can move forward with the relationship.
Totally. The use that I recommend to people for hard proofs that are not really what you wanted them to be is give them away as gifts, because your mom or your auntie or the kids next door or whomever will love those prints, even if they don't quite live up to your standards, even if they're just stepping stones on the way to the final print. No one's ever going to notice that the one that's in your living room is different from the one that they have. They'll love the one that they got.
I mean, I've done that for sure.
It's great.
I have a whole drawer of them, actually.
I recently did a drawer clean out of my flat files, and it was like, oh man, I've been holding onto so much of this stuff. Just started like addressing labels to people, like, okay, you're going to get 2 prints, and you're going to get 2 prints. Like, make these go away.
Yeah, no, I think that's the way to do it. Well, let's get to the heart of the matter here. Why do you think it is important for photographers to print their work instead of letting it rot on our hard drives?
Well, the first and most important reason is that when the apocalypse comes, your hard drives are not going to contain any data anymore. Those EMPs, it's going to wipe everything out. It's the same reason I recommend people shoot film when the apocalypse happens, man. We're all SOL with these hard drives and the Instagrams. No, but seriously, there's something about holding your work.
I think we're gonna have.
Jesus, really?
I think we're gonna have other things to worry about, like food and water.
You're not gonna be worried about your archive after
I don't
all
think
that?
so. Not at that point.
Okay, fair enough. The thing for me really is having something physical that you can hold, that you can give, that you can put up, because. Like, how many images have you taken on your phone in the last week? And how many of them are you ever going to look at again? You take it, you stick it on a hard drive, and it's gone forever. It might as well be deleted because it's just taking up digital space that doesn't mean anything. But when you print something and tack it on the wall, and you walk by it every day, or you give it to a friend as like a gift or a thank you or whatever it is, it means something, and you start to be really critical of things. Next time you're in a gallery, everyone who's listening, observe the distance you are from a photograph, because photographers tend to get extremely close to photography. You walk into a gallery and you can tell who the photographers are because their noses are 2 inches from the picture and they're looking at it trying to figure out, I wonder what ISO he was using for this shot. Which lens do you think this is? You do that to your own work, and it improves your work, right? You walk into another gallery, and the guy who owns the gallery is just standing there watching you, and he knows you're not buying anything, and you've just been written off as unimportant because you're standing with your nose too close to the damn picture. But doing it to your own work is helpful.
And something I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years from printing is that oftentimes I've gotten really excited about a print or a photograph, and I've printed it and I've hung it on the wall, and then I get tired of it. And there's other photos. I print it, hang it on the wall, and I still love it after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I think printing helps you really form a closer relationship with the images that are more you. And then it also, I think, can help you reframe and hone in on the types of photography that really speaks to you or speaks about you as a photographer.
I totally agree with that. I think you're going to notice patterns. All of the images that I print that look a certain way, I love them when I print them. And then after 6 months or a month or whatever, I'm sort of sick of them. But all the images of backlit trees I'm in love with for 10 years. Like, oh, maybe you should focus on that. Maybe that's really what fills your cup as a photographer. And it's like, great. Now you have a direction for a body of work. And my opus, whatever, will be an entire book of backlit trees because that's the thing that just makes me cry every time I see one. For whatever reason, I love them. And it's like,
Yeah,
poof, done. Found the pattern.
exactly. And then you can stop spending time photographing stuff that you think might look good, but you're not that excited about.
Yeah, or like even when you are just sort of chasing the light or sketching, just like wandering around, snap, 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 because it's digital, it's free, and who cares? You can use that as an excuse to like print 10 of those and see, does this resonate with me? Is this interesting? Can I edit this to make it look cool? I spend so much of my time in the platinum palladium world that I struggle with high contrast scenes now because I
Mm,
know that I can't achieve the black that I would really need to make that print work. And so as an exercise, sometimes I'll just be like, all right, screw it. I'm going to totally crush the blacks for 3 weeks in everything that I shoot and think in a silver gelatin mindset. Or occasionally I'll shoot in color and do the same thing.
ooh.
It's just like, ooh, color. Like I'm not used to that. I don't live in that. That's not my day in, my day out, my bread and butter. It's not what really fills my cup, but it's fun to experiment and play around with that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
for sure.
printing can be a way to force you to notice what's good and what's bad and what really you're drawn to and what you sort of look at and hate.
Yeah, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but when it comes to printing, one thing I've noticed as well is that there's lots of images that look good on the web, or you're happy with them. You're like, oh, this is nice, it looks good. And then you print it and it just doesn't have quite the same impact. And so it's interesting that when it's a physical, tangible object, it conveys a different concept or different idea than when it's just a digital print. And I don't totally understand why that is, but I do know that it does transform the experience of viewing the photograph.
It absolutely does, yeah. And there's something about the backlit screens that we all spend all of our time with, especially for photographers who keep their screens at full brightness. Don't do that if you're going to print. You're going to be really disappointed. Turn that brightness down, baby. Uh, yeah, when you play that game and you're used to everything being backlit all the time on your phone, on your screen, on your Kindle, on your whatever, and you hold a print that's not backlit, you kind of go, wait, what? You look at a photo book and kind of go, I don't understand why these seem dull to me. It's because they're not backlit. You have to put your photography in a well lit room and like so that was something else that I just had a brainwave about is when you're printing, you can control the display scenario. If I put a print on the wall and I point a 100-watt light bulb at it, it will always look the same. But if I post to Instagram and you don't have HDR enabled on your phone or you've got your brightness turned way down or whatever, it completely changes the way that the photograph looks. And so I, as the photographer, no longer control how that looks. But when I have a print, it always looks the same when it's well lit.
Yeah, and I was gonna say there's a danger in that too, right? Because I had a photograph that recently I had printed for a client. It looked perfect. It was amazing. It was exactly the way it's supposed to be printed, and the way it's supposed to look. And it was an acrylic print. And the customer got it, and they called me and they're like, "Something's really, really wrong with this photograph." And I was like, "Oh no!" Like I'm like I've printed it. I looked at it. It looks really good. Like, tell me what happened. And they're like, everything is really orange. I'm like, really? orange. I don't understand. And then I'm like, can you send me some pictures with your phone? Like, just take some pictures. And well, it turns out they had like 6,000 Kelvin lamps going at it or whatever, and it was just warm as all could be. And I was like, yeah,
Yep.
you need to go out and buy some like
You need
3,500
daylight balanced
Kelvin.
lights.
Yeah.
Other way around, yeah. So, yes, that's a big deal when you're shipping prints to customers. That's huge. When they're standing with you in front of the print, and then you take it off the wall and say, here you go, and they take it home, then they know it's not the print usually.
Right, right, right,
But
right.
like galleries will typically light in either a warm, like a 2700K, or a daylight, like a 5000, 5500K light bulb. Those are
Right,
the
right.
two. So it helps to
I
have
don't know
really
why
expensive prints.
I don't know why I always mix those up. I
It's
think it's
weird. You
because
would
in
think
Lightroom
warmer would be
it's
hotter, would be
right,
higher
right.
numbers, right?
Well, and that's how it
But
is when you're in
it's
Lightroom too. I think that's
right.
why. Anyway,
Everything's a little backwards. But like
yeah.
we will proof prints for the display light. So while you're here spending lots of money making prints with me, which is awesome, thank you, welcome. Uh, if I say where are you going to hang this print, and you say I'm going to put it in my bathroom, we're going to print it a stop and a half lighter because there's no light in your bathroom. But if you say, oh, I'm going to put this opposite a wall of windows that gets continuous south-facing exposure, we might print it a little darker so that those highlights don't just get totally nuked.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be hanging your work in a gallery, I'll call the gallery and I'll say, how much light do you face on each print? How far away are they? What's the output of your bulbs? And the gallery will say, oh yeah, here's the output measured at the artwork wall. And I'll say, great, thank you. I can proof for that.
Right, right. So for people at home, what would you recommend they do in terms of file prep to kind of best guess? Maybe let's talk about kind of the standard room that would be like an average display situation, and then maybe let's talk about like a well-lit room. Like how would you recommend people approach file prep based on those two scenarios?
I generally tell people that your print will be darker than you want it to be. So the first thing you want to do is take the brightness on your screen down to below half, especially if you're a Mac user. Dial that way down and then make a
Yep.
print and see. I'm a hard proof guy. The only way I can tell you to do this is to hard proof the damn thing. Dial it way down. If it's going to go in a particularly dark area, like our goal here is to make your screen on your computer match the environment that the print will be displayed in. So the darker your screen is, the darker the room that you're hanging the print in will be. And you're kind of looking at the image and you can edit it with just that one little bar of brightness on your screen turned on. If, say, you're hanging this in the hallway that leads to your bathroom with one light bulb away at the end of a 40-foot hallway, like it's going to be dark in there. And so you're going to have to brighten the image in order to make it visible. Or, and my favorite solution, hang a bunch of track lights and you can point them at anything that you want in your hallway or wherever it is. Like if you're going to spend a whole bunch of money making a big, beautiful $1,000 print, get one of those little like $5 things that lets you direct a light bulb and screw that into the can in the ceiling so that you can light the print. Ta-da!
Yeah. That's what I did in here. Let's see if this works. If I can show
I
you.
was gonna say,
There you go. That's
yeah,
what I've got
dude.
in
That's
here.
like
Yeah.
it's not a crazy expensive track light system, and it
No,
lights
and
the photographs behind you, especially metal and acrylic prints. Really
exactly.
need a lot of light.
I'm not an electrician either, so it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, you're still alive, so you're doing good.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. 10 out of 10 recommend like take that brightness way down before you start making prints, and then when you do make prints, make little baby ones so that you can wander around in the space where it's going to be, or like tack or tape it to the wall. Don't use thumbtacks, use tape. Little blue tape goes a long way. Tape the thing to the wall and kind of say, oh, that is way too dark. I need to brighten that up a whole lot before it will look any good.
I actually did that recently. I printed a whole bunch of my photos, just little tiny like 5x7 fellas, just
Mm-hmm.
like this. And my goal was to kind of find images that worked well together, that were complementary, so that I could create like a gallery on my website that incentivized people to buy matching prints or prints that would work together. So I think there's all kinds of use cases for printing.
Yeah. And the
Do
little
it.
baby prints, like if you're gonna look at making a book, make a 5x7 print of every image that you think you might maybe want to possibly include. And then put them all back to front or side to side on your kitchen table, which is where people look at these books and say, oh, this one's too dark because I'm sitting at my kitchen table and it looks like terrible. Or it doesn't work well with this one, or it doesn't fit in this series. Or, I thought my white balance was consistent across this series, but it turns out it's really not. And I should go fix that. You're
Yep.
not going to notice that stuff until you print it out and put it in the use case that is whatever it is you're trying to do.
Well, cool, Matt. Couple more things. Would love for you to tell us about your quote unquote catch and release approach to photography of year.
Okay, so listen, photographers. Uh, we have a problem. My name is Matt, and I have a problem. I like to buy camera gear. If you can relate, welcome to the club, I guess. Gas is a real thing. So I own a camera store, which means that I have access to all of the camera gear all the time. And that's grand, except that I get into this paralysis where I can't figure out which camera to use and which film stock to use because we're mostly film people around here. And so I decided that I was going to pick one camera a year and I would shoot almost exclusively with that one camera, which forces me to play the game with a specific format or a specific style or whatever it is. And then that means I'm not allowed to buy any more. And then once I get to the end of that year, I can say, okay, this camera was cool. It's not the one camera to rule them all for me. So I'm going to sell it and use that money towards my next purchase. Most film cameras are holding their value reasonably well. So it's not like I'm buying the brand newest digital camera and 18 months from now it's worthless. It's like I can buy a camera and get my money back pretty much every time. There are some cases like I had an M6 a while ago and then I sold it and then they re-released the M6 and the prices went totally bonkers and I was kicking myself for that. But by and large, like I took the money that I sold that M6 and I bought something else that was of similar value, so I'm going to be fine. So the catch and release is like I don't have 40 cameras sitting on shelves that exist only to look pretty because I never use them. I have like 5 cameras in my permanent collection and I use all of them regularly. If a camera sits and I don't use it, I sell it. Also was a David Duchemin experience. The gear is good, vision is better. It's like, all right, fine, I'll sell them.
How long until you don't use it before you sell it?
I give myself 6 months. If I don't pick up a camera inside of 6 months that doesn't on its own have meaning to me, then screw it. I'll get rid of it. Like I have 3 cameras in my permanent collection so far. I have my first ever film camera, it was a Nikon FM. I have a recently acquired Hasselblad XPan that I purchased from the estate of my late mentor. So he passed away and his kids didn't want any of his cameras and I bought all of them. And that one camera is the one I'm keeping. And then the other one is a $45 plastic camera that I love. It's so great and I'm going to shoot it until it dies because I can just stick it in my pocket and don't worry about it. And I get it wet all the time. I take it out on the lake, skiing, whatever it is. And it's like, who cares? It doesn't matter. And those are the 3 cameras that I'm never getting rid of.
Like a Holga?
It's smaller than a Holga. It's a Rito, ultra wide and slim.
Cool.
I have it right here, actually. It's so pretty. It's pink, like this beautiful pink, and it's been totally ruined, and I've dropped it in the water more times than I care to count, which ruins the roll of film, but I pull the camera out. It's got no battery, no mechanics. Like, after the apocalypse we were talking about, this will be the only camera I own that works still. And it's going to work great.
Nice.
Catch and release has been great.
I love that approach. So you had alluded earlier that you guys do some workshops there. Tell us about your shoot to print workshops that you do at Hidden Light.
Yeah, so I am a photographer for fun and not like a professional, right? But I'm really good at taking an image that's been shot or helping to figure out the way to shoot an image such that it prints the way that I want it to. The execution of the vision is sort of my job. And for years, I've been doing one-on-one printmaking workshops where you come in and I teach you how to make a silver or a platinum or whatever it is. And this year we decided we wanted to give people the opportunity to come shoot with us with the platinum palladium output in mind. And so we work on which camera settings to use and how to work with your exposure and everything else so that you have the data you need to make the type of print that you want. And so we launched that this year. We had a very fun first workshop a couple months ago. I've got another one that's almost full. That's in August. I think I have 2 seats left, where we do the thing that no one does. We take a picture and then we process it and then we print it all in a weekend.
That's awesome.
It's tough. It's a lot of work to go through that whole process and get to the point where it's like, all right, yeah, here we go. Let's do it.
I think that's an awesome idea. I was actually at a photography conference before COVID out of Yosemite, and they had a Canon printer there. I think B&H brought it, or one of the camera stores brought it, and it was cool. Like, people could take their photos and then process them that night in their hotel room, and then they could bring their memory card into the big conference center area and print their photo. I think it was like they were letting people do like 20 by 30s or something. It was pretty, I mean, they're sizable prints. It was a really cool thing though, just to see like people go through that process of, you know, from creating the image to processing the image to printing the image. I think there's a lot of value in that approach to a workshop.
Totally. That's kind of my general idea. And I hadn't seen it done. And, you know, when I take a workshop, I'm always shooting a bunch of images and I'm like, okay, well, now I want to print them because I'm a print freak. So we're just going to try and do all that all together all at once. For your workshops, if you need someone to come do prints or help enable that, just let me know.
Perfect. Awesome, Matt. Well, last question. Who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are a couple of people that we need to get to know here?
Well, you've already had David Brookover. So he's always one of my first recommendations. He's a great guy. I'm going to recommend Tyler Shields, who's another of my clients and is the reason we started making really big platinums. He's a fun guy to have around. And Austin Leathers is another photographer I really like, who's putting together some really cool stuff. He shoots mostly underwater. And the silver gelatin underwater black and white combo is killer.
Oh, yeah, I bet that's magic.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, this has been super, super, super fun. And I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule, running the gallery, running the workshops, running the print lab, running the camera store to join us here.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I look forward to continuing to listen to the podcast.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Well, thank you to Matt for the awesome conversation on the podcast today. It was awesome getting to know you and to learn everything that you're up to down there in Flagstaff. I'll be sure to stop by next time I'm in the area. I encourage listeners to do the same. Have you ever printed on platinum palladium before or seen one in person? I'd love to hear about your experience over on Patreon, where you can chime in about this week's episode for free by heading to patreon.com/fstop and listen. I look forward to seeing you there and to hear about your experience. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.